Have you ever thought about the safety features that come with a modern well system? All of the different parts that for some reason always end up being on well systems, but do they all have a purpose? I think we should talk about it today, so let's go ahead and dive into it. So whenever you have a well system, right, you're gonna have a few things involved that help to prevent any kind of injury or sickness or any other kind of weird shenanigans going on. Everything starts with the well itself. Now, that could be a steel-cased well, could be a PVC-cased well. It's going to be sometimes 4 inches, sometimes up all the way up to 6¼ inches. They come in a variety of shapes and sizes. Now, well, I guess they're all cylindrical in shape, but if it's a hand-dug well, that's where it gets a little bit different. In this particular conversation, we're going to be talking about modern wells, basically anything that's drilled from 1960 to now. There are a few drilled wells prior to that, but it's going to be more of a modern system. So when you have your well, the first and most important thing is going to be the height of the head. And you might be asking, what does that have to do with anything? Well, in our state, we need to have at least 8 inches above the surface for the wellhead with a vermin-proof cap. And the reason they picked this height is so that way if you have water, right? Let's just say you have the rain dumps 3 inches of rain in the backyard. Maybe you have a spigot that's leaking and you've got water flowing. You don't want to have that water coming up and into the well itself. By having everything up about 8 inches, it'll be higher in a floodplain, so like 2 foot if you're in a floodplain. At least in our area, your area might be a little bit different. By having it up, anytime it rains, the water will go around the base of the well and not up and in to the well. Believe it or not, a lot of older homes would have either the well buried or they would have a well pit, and that pit most times would be flush to the ground. Well pits, as we've covered previously, are basically just large rooms underground. Usually they're about 4x4 or 6x6, and they're just made of cinder block. They're just stacked cinder block with a concrete lid right on top. That's where the well used to be. Well, the problem is that you get a heavy rain or you get some kind of maybe some compromised blocks for that pit. You can have rainwater and stuff starting to fill that hole. A lot of times those wells would have basically a 2-piece cap that would have 2 plates and a little gasket in the middle. And you would bolt down and it would pinch that gasket, which would create the seal for the well. The problem is you're putting a lot of faith in that little gasket keeping bacteria and water from the surface out of your well. So whenever you have a modern well, you have to have it up to avoid that situation. Also brings into play the vermin-proof cap. Now, again, all these old wells used to be in pits. Eventually, they started using what's called a pitless adapter, and then they would have the well up. Well, they started using these things called one-piece well caps. Now, we've seen these caps before, and they're very common for homes that are older than mid-80s. Usually, you start seeing 2-piece caps around 82 to now in our area. These caps were just there to keep it to where, a kid can't grab the electric wires and start messing with it and can't easily get into the well and start dropping stuff. The problem is that a lot of these caps didn't have any kind of gasket or any other way of preventing ants, spiders, bees, stuff like that, grass clippings even, getting up and into the well. That's where vermin-proof caps come into play. So these are our modern style of lids. And basically what'll happen is you'll have 2 pieces, right? One piece that affixes to the actual casing, and then another piece that will go on top. Now, the piece that affixes to the casing, depending on what it is, if it's PVC, it'll be glued. If it's a metal one, it'll have like a little rubber gasket and some set bolts. But the difference for this one is going to be how they deal with the conduit. So by having a nice secure conduit that screws into the well, it'll prevent anything from crawling up through the electrical wires and into the well itself. Now, whenever this happens, don't panic, right? It can happen, right? People hit these things with lawnmowers all the time. The height of the well and the cap are your first 2 lines of defense. So that gets it up to where you don't have bugs crawling in there. You don't have water from the surface coming in there. You don't have any other kind of goofy shenanigans going on. Now we got to start worrying about the internal stuff and the stuff in the house. So you already have your water coming up from the pump, right? You got your supply line into the home to the pressure tank. The pressure tank's that big blue thing in the basement. Now, that water coming in, once it's out of the ground and in your house, you need to make sure you have some kind of backflow prevention. Now, most well pumps, I would say just about every single one of them, has a check valve on it. A lot of times they're built in, but a good installer is always putting an extra one in there. You're supposed to put them in multiple times throughout the drop line, depending on how deep your well is, but you should have at least one check valve in your well. But you should also have another one at the pressure tank T. Basically, right as that pipe gets into the house, before it goes anywhere else, you got to have something in the home to prevent backflow to the well. Then you're going to have your pressure tank. The reason it's important to have backflow prevention is once that water gets into the home, who knows where your pipes have been? Who knows what's going on inside the house? If you have a loss of power and the pump is no longer keeping the pressure up and into the home, what'll happen is that water that's maybe contaminated in your home can go back into the well and potentially cause contamination. If you contaminate the well, you potentially contaminate your neighbor's wells. So that's why it becomes a public health issue. So that's why the state gets on top of people to make sure that you have check valves in your system. Now, that doesn't do anything as far as mechanics go. The pump is going to push water into the pressure tank. We've discussed pressure tanks previously. Basically, the gist of it is top part's air, bottom part's water, there's a bladder in between. What will happen is the pump will pump the water into the home. Traditionally in our area, 40-60 switch is what we see. So what that means is at 40 PSI, pump kicks on, pump, 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 till 60 PSI, pump kicks off. From there, you're going to see a slight ebb and flow as you use water. Now, let's just say that your pressure switch, which is the little gray box, that's what controls the pump turning on and off, gets stuck in the on position, right? Maybe some sediment got stuck underneath and it's not reading enough pressure. Maybe the springs are getting worn out. Maybe somebody installed the wires a little bit too far and they're actually touching. Stuff like that can happen. Now, that pump will continue to pump because it's not smart. It doesn't know any better. If that switch is stuck on, the pump's just gonna say, oh, hey, they need water. Keep pumping. Go, 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 go. Well, if you don't do anything about it, you could burst pipes or you could make your pressure tank into an explosive. It's great. You could send that bad boy up to the second floor, no problem. But that's why we have what's called a pressure relief valve. Just like with your water heater, your pressure tank, even though it's cold, is going to have a pressure relief valve. Now, the standard PSI at which these things set off is about 75 PSI. You can get some different ones that are slightly higher, but 75 is more than enough for a typical residential family house. And how these devices work, basically, is you have a spring pushing into the pipe with a gasket. As the pressure in the pipe builds, it will push against that spring, which will then allow the water to escape the pipe and, in theory, lower the pressure. Most commonly, you'll see this as a drip. If things are going terribly, you'll see it just kind of spurting all over the place. And that's where we get into what kind of started my thought on this whole video. Whenever you have a pressure relief valve, regardless if it's cold water, hot water, air, whatever, it has to face down, right? And the reason why is that device is only designed to go off if something's gone wrong and the pressure is getting too high. So if you have it facing up, you can actually have it come back at you and hurt you, hurt somebody else, or potentially get onto the electrical components of the system. So you always have to have it facing down. That way you don't have it shooting up. Makes sense, right? So in the particular property that I was at this afternoon that made me think about all of this is once you have your pressure tank in the house, sometimes people will go ahead and they'll build things around it. So they built a little like closet area and they have a little hatch, right? You open this hatch and you can see the pressure tank, you can see the T-assembly, you can do everything you got to do. But the way that the hatch is facing, once you open it, you're looking directly at the pressure relief valve. So if that pressure relief valve went off, guess what? It's coming right back at you as you're attempting to figure out what that noise is. That can cause some problems. So easy enough, you just rotate it to face down, but it could be very problematic. Definitely not what you want to do. So if you're going to install a system yourself, just make sure you put that stupid thing face down. The other thing in the home that is there to help you as far as safety goes is going to be a power disconnect. Now in our state, you have to have a disconnect within eyesight of the pressure switch. So again, that little gray box. So you have to have that disconnect so that way if you're working on it, if something goes wrong, you can easily and quickly kill the power to the well pump. Now, if you don't know where that is, just look around. You'll usually see like a light switch, you'll see like the pull bars, sometimes it'll be like an actual lever. They come in a variety of shapes, sizes, and colors, but it'll be some light switch style. If you don't have one of those, more commonly you can see the electric panel from the switch. Perfectly fine. Usually where people run into problems is when they finish a basement. So when the house is unfinished, or when the basement's unfinished in the home, you can see from one end of the basement to the other end of the basement, from the pressure switch to the electric panel, and then you go and finish that basement, and guess what? No, you can no longer see that pressure switch. Somehow people always end up forgetting about this little step, but it's very important. It's super important to make sure you don't skip it. They're not that expensive. You know, you could even probably do it yourself if you feel frisky enough. I think that these safety features are always important. If you have gained anything out of this, please hit that like button and subscribe. I implore you to go ahead and look at your house. Do you have, a nice vermin-proof cap? What's the electrical conduit look like on the wellhead? Do you have a check valve, right? Does your pressure switch face down? Is it looking in decent operable condition, or is it all gnarly and corroded to pieces? Do you have an electrical switch, right? All of these things are very important to make sure that you have a nice, safe home and a good working water system that does not cause you any damage. Floods are all sorts of problematic for all different types of people because they're expensive. When water starts to go into the house, you're gonna have so many more things to fix than just getting rid of the water. Usually it's drywall, electrical, all sorts of other things, and that can get very expensive very quickly, and some homeowners insurance doesn't cover stuff like that. So I thought it was important to have this conversation. If you gained any value, again, hit that like button, hit subscribe, and I look forward to talking to you guys tomorrow.